We've convened this because we are looking at recovery and reconstruction at a time when the international landscape has fundamentally shifted. As I think everyone in this room knows, countries affected by fragility, conflict, and violence are facing increasingly complex crises, while international financial support is becoming scarcer and geopolitical fragmentation change are reshaping priorities. And for this community, this raises a set of questions. How do we build back for peace under these current political and financial realities? How are interventions sequenced and prioritized in ways that are conflict sensitive, inclusive, and sustainable? How do we balance short-term stabilization with long-term institutional reform and economic transformation? And how do we balance urgency with sensitivity in the time that it takes for the right policies and programs to be put into place? How do we preserve human capital, create jobs, and strengthen social cohesion, and ensure recovery reaches the most effective? And how do countries build resilience with fewer international resources while leveraging the assets that they have and preparing the domestic reforms, private sector engagement, and local ownership? Today's discussion brings together perspectives from governments, multilateral institutions, and stabilization practitioners working directly on these challenges. I'm really pleased that we have this panel with us today. And I want to particularly recognize how difficult the crises are in both Ukraine and Lebanon, and particularly extend thanks to the ministers for making time to be with us today. Minister Sayed in the room, and Minister Sobolev will be speaking to us from Ukraine. I'm going to do quick introductions, although our panelists need no introduction, so I'll give short introductions, and then we'll turn to the first question. We have Minister Sayed, who is the Minister of Social Affairs in Lebanon, appointed to the cabinet in February 2025, and she's spent 25 years at the World Bank before that, so really can speak from both sides of the table. Thank you for being with us. Online, we have Minister Sobolev, who's the Minister of Economy, Environment and Agriculture of Ukraine, also appointed 2025. Before that, he was the Deputy Minister of Economy and is well known in Ukraine and internationally for his innovations with the Prozoro technology in Ukraine and his transparency reforms. Thank you for being with us. We have Anne Witowski, who was the Assistant Secretary of State for the Bureau of Conflict and Stabilization Operations at the Department of State in the United States, and had a long and distinguished career across the US government, including as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Stability and Humanitarian Affairs, and is now a Senior Advisor Non-Resident at CSIS. Thank you for being with us. We have Shoko Nada, who has taken up a role in 2023 as UNDP's Assistant Administrator and Director of the Crisis Bureau, and where she leads the delivery of UNDP's crisis offer, and has a 25-year UN career with practical experience really across the world, but including as country director in Nepal, and time in the India office in Yugoslavia, Tajikistan, Kosovo, so a real breadth of practical country level experience. And then finally, Butena Germazi, who's the Director of Strategy and Operations for the Middle East, North Africa, Afghanistan, and Pakistan at the World Bank, and has had a distinguished career at the World Bank, including as Director for Regional Integration and as Director of Digital Development. So again, thank you to everybody for being here with us today. With that, I'm going to go straight to my first question and ask Minister Sobolev for Ukraine. Ukraine is now in its 5th year of war, while simultaneously planning for recovery and reconstruction. How is the government approaching prioritization and sequence while the conflict is still ongoing, particularly in balancing urgent recovery needs, infrastructure repair, economic resilience, and fiscal constraints? And I know Minister Sobolev is going to have to leave after this intervention, so I'm going to ask him a second question as well. If you look ahead, Ukraine's reconstruction discussions are increasingly focused not simply on rebuilding what existed before, but on shaping a future economy. How is the government thinking about a future economy, including the aspects of governance reform, public investment needs, and how do you prioritize investments? Minister, over to you.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues. Thank you for inviting us. So the priorities are definitely a question, just because during the wartime there's so many of those. And we're thinking in different layers. So the first one is, of course, the emergency and need for survival. So basically, it's we invest in things that keep the country safe during winter time and keep our citizens safer with ongoing Russian attacks. So we invest in additional energy. We invest in protection of critical infrastructure, like energy infrastructure, like water management. We invest in also additional water management facilities that will provide backup in case Russia is trying to target this. So this is the first layer that needs for survival. It also means that we're rebuilding in a way that helps us minimize the damage from Russian attacks. So, in example, in energy, we're not rebuilding huge energy facilities that are very centralized. We're rebuilding decentralized energy generation that is harder to target for Russia. So that's also when you hear like building back better, this is what it means in Ukraine: building backup, redundancy, and also like decentralized, because we see all the decentralized solutions are working better during war with Russia. The other bit is, of course, helping the businesses to survive and stay productive. So it's we're investing in getting people back to work, in war risk insurance, in affordable loans for businesses that help them to get through in the case of emergency. And you need to be prepared for that. So quite recently we were on a tour in Baltic countries. So this is like one very particular example. And what we see is that first 100 kilometers from the front line, economic system breaks down. The risks are way too unpredictable for the banks to keep lending. Insurers won't go there because of the security reasons. Even the appraisals won't go there. So there is no insurance, no risk insurance, no lending is decreased significantly. And for Baltic countries, like first 100 kilometers from Russia is sometimes the whole country. So what works? The government should step in. The government should develop some financial products and provide this like first loss provision. And it is very important. Like we learned it hard way. It took us a couple of years to actually start building these financial products together with World Bank, together with other IFIs like EBRD, DFC, but they exist now, but they are backed by the government funding. And the third layer is the transformational investment. So basically the first two decrease risk to a level that businesses could invest, and basically they help to crowd in private capital. So we're not waiting, and there is no possibility to wait since the war is going on for the 5th year already. So basically we need to understand how to leverage public funding to create more private capital investment even during the wartime. The risks are very different in different parts of the country, and we see businesses quite active in investing into the western part of Ukraine, which is much farther from the front line and closer to European border, which is quite natural. So like the reforms that allow to do that are the ones that we are targeting. In the maybe the last bit, answering to the second question on how to how do we approach the governance, right? So we're trying to create transparency for all the donors and businesses to the extent that we can do it right now during the wartime through digitalization. So we have, for public projects, we have single project pipeline. We have strategic council that is on the basis of the cabinet of ministers that prioritizes the whole public capital expenditures in Ukraine. So all our donors, all businesses, they understand in which parts of the country government's gonna invest first and then second, so they can plan accordingly. Just because we don't have time for sometimes lengthy procedures in aligning everyone during the wartime, like people need to act fast. That's how they need this access to information. So we do it through digitalization. So like digitalizing all these projects. We have our dream system that allows to do that, and that gives this kind of transparency to both businesses and international organizations to know how to work that. And also we're preparing for the peacetime because we understand that the shift and also in the macroeconomic shift is going to be huge. From the like high risky situation to like where the security risks are much lower. We expect people to come, we expect additional investments to come, but we should be prepared. So together with World Bank, we're developing this macroeconomic framework called the economy of the future to understand what Ukraine needs and how this recovery is going to look like macroeconomically, which types of reforms we should be doing now to get this additional boosts once the ceasefire is there. And I think it's all important. You can't have one or the other just because the war is still ongoing. And I think the last bit is that you can see that the economy is changing, and Ukraine's innovations that the experience that we're developing during this wartime are now valued across the world. So with our like military technology, drone technology, but I think people will see how we use this redundancy and distributed energy that they will also learn for themselves. And also, I think a lot of innovation in financial products in this like war risk insurance that is not accessible right now, for example, in the frontline like countries from Europe that are bordering Russia, and I think they will need it. So we're ready to share this experience, and I think it's very useful. We learned it the hard way, and we're trying to kind of share it so the world is safer. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Minister Sayed, only a year ago, Lebanon was discussing recovery planning and development programming and social resilience. And today, the country is once again facing acute crisis dynamics and displacement pressures and emergency response needs. How are you managing the immediate challenging of both responding to urgent humanitarian and social pressures while trying to preserve that medium and longer term perspective to preserve longer-term recovery and development objectives? And what principles guide difficult resource allocation decisions and help maintain public trust?
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for the organizers for having me. Some of you were at the previous session, so you might hear some of the things again, but I'll try to to innovate and give a bit more insight. So indeed, this is exactly what we're trying to do, balance between the humanitarian response and the long-term development needs. And what I've learned very quickly, because I'm actually a development person, not a humanitarian person in terms of my profession, my experience, is that you have to keep doing both at the same time. It's just very crystal clear to me now and to all the team that are working is that we have to be balancing the two, which is of course very difficult. But let me say, maybe give some concretely how we operated. When we came into government, February 2025, we came in as a government on a platform of reform and development. This was the government program, and each of us in our ministries had very ambitious plans of how we're going to change things. In my own ministry, I was moving from Ministry of Social Affairs to Ministry of Social Development. All of our work in social was about economic inclusion, was about empowerment. So it was not just about giving cash transfers, it's about what next, how do you get people into jobs, the theme of this forum. And sort of changing the structure of the ministry and moving, into developing early childhood development programs, things that are really human capital investment for the long term. And then about 3 months before the March 2nd, when the war broke out again for the second time in less than 3 years, the Prime Minister asked us, each minister and the relevant ones, to prepare emergency plans in kind of quiet, not to create panic, but that in case the war breaks out in a big way again. And so we did, hoping that it wouldn't happen, but it did happen. On March 2nd, the shots were fired and the aggression began and so on. And within 48 hours, you had almost 1 million people, 20% of the population on the move. And we had to, of course, very quickly, unfortunately, because of our preparedness, we had the list of shelters where we were going to direct people to. We quickly worked with our UN partners and NGOs to equip these shelters with the basics. We were able to open 700 shelters within the first week or 10 days of the war breaking out. So that was fine. But then we very quickly moved to developing registration links using data. As the Minister of Ukraine said, using digital is very important in these moments. So we launched a self-registration link for IDPs to register, and again we had that 1 million registering in it within a few days. And we continue to use this, which I mention it because it's very much part of the system building and the development approach, if you will, the resilience building and so on that we'd been doing starting from a year ago anyway. Not necessarily anticipating that there might be another war, but knowing that building systems always helps in good times and certainly in bad times. So this we sort of were able to, by thinking already beforehand what to do, plan it. But of course, when you are in the midst of it, you realize that there's many things that you haven't thought about, and you have to continue to be innovating. Every day, there's a new issue that we face. There's, the whole conflict is very unpredictable. And we are in a context of a regional and a global conflict as well. And that itself imposes our ability to respond and not respond. So first priority, of course, always becomes life-saving. How do we get people sheltered and fed and their basic health and the like? And we launched a flash appeal, all the kind of things that you do when you have this kind of situation. And the international community was thankfully responded. However, fiscal constraints become really big. Lebanon is a country, lower middle income, still highly indebted, had yet not completed the financial economic reforms that we need to be doing. And our banking sector is still not vibrant. So we and our fiscal space is very, very limited. So we reached out to the international community, we're able to get support. But as I mentioned in the previous panel, the global environment and the regional environment has changed dramatically in just 2 years. Why in 2024, during that war, which lasted 66 days, we were able to bring in $700 million in grant financing for humanitarian aid for Lebanon, for the conflict. But today, where we are already at the 100th day of the war and do not know when the end is to happen, we're able to bring only 300 million from the international community. So there's a big shift in terms of a global aid. What is being spent and on global international humanitarian aid is 1% of what's being spent today on military and weaponry, just 1% of that. So it's not that there isn't money out there in the world, but it's obviously the priorities have shifted. And countries like Lebanon, which find themselves in the midst of this consecutive fragility episodes, have to find a way to deal with it. And this is a new reality. So very limited fiscal space. But still, our priority is initially, of course, to save lives. Second, to make sure that the human capital is maintained. So even the children of the displaced that are in shelters, we must somehow be able to continue their schooling, their education, because this will be maybe the 7th year of an interrupted education situation in Lebanon, following, of course, COVID and the Port of Beirut blast and financial economic crisis, which has led to a lot of strikes by the teachers and so on. So, but still keeping the focus on that. Building our social protection systems, very important, and scaling them up. And again, fortunately, this was a very good investment over the past 15 months that we did with our partners, World Bank and UK and many, in terms of building our systems, our databases, our registries, which have come very handy today in being able to scale up social protection and our cash transfer programs, which are today reaching about 20% of the population. So it's really about balancing all of that, and in a very restricted environment, however. And then the third maybe element I want to say is that working on communication and talking to people. And this is something in this response we've given a high priority. Myself, I go out every day almost at 6:30 p.m. prime time on national TV, and for 5 minutes only give an update to the citizens and to everyone about where we are and what's happening, and be open and frank with people with the difficulties. People are not stupid. They know the situation is not good when bombs are over your head and we don't know where things are heading. But just that 5 minutes, apparently the feedback we get gives comfort to people that the government speaking to them, that somebody's speaking to them, keeping them. So communication, and I've learned in this job, you can never do enough communication. It's just absolutely critical, and you have to use all kinds of media, social and print media, and everything that is out there. Just finally, kind of course, where we are as a government, there are several tracks that we are pursuing. There is the political track, of course, which is happening very much so in Washington, D.C. There is a humanitarian track, which I lead and I've described. There's also then this, I would say, return and recovery and reconstruction track. We're also we have been working on this for a few months. This involves, of course, doing damage assessments, which themselves are changing very quickly. I mean, the number of houses that are destroyed is changing every day. But keeping that, there's a whole team that works on that. World Bank is very engaged with us in estimating the damages and the like. And then thinking of what kind of recovery, what kind of return. We know that reconstruction in Lebanon, if the war stops tomorrow, it's probably a 10-year program. So in the meantime, where do you house people? Most of the damages are for housing, private property, people's homes. So where do you house people? And that, again, is something we're working on immediately. So just my summary point is that you've got to work on all tracks, all at the same time. Of course, this means a huge stretch of capacity. I mean, enormous stretch of capacity. In my own ministry, it's the same team that was working on development and so on, now moved to work on displacement humanitarian. We expanding capacity, but I've also learned you need capacity to manage the capacity. There's a lot of effort that has to be put there, but it is well worth spending time on building that capacity, because we're going to need it for what hope will not be the next crisis.
Thank you, Minister. I'll now turn to Shoko Noder and ask you, UNDP often works at the intersection of emergency response, stabilization, governance, and development. How do you think about balancing across timeframes and priorities? And perhaps you could also speak to us about security, justice, and local governance institutions and their role in creating credible and sustainable recovery pathways.
Thank you very much, and very good morning, and also maybe participants somewhere, in other parts of the world, good afternoon. Thank you very much for the question, very important question. And I think we heard already from the minister what it is really like in a crisis situation on the ground, where missiles are flying, drones are flying. It is very true from my own experiences that recovery or development cannot wait while the conflicts are ongoing. In this context, we should not just only focus on humanitarian, but we have to continue our recovery and development work. What does it mean? We are institutions. We have institutions that function as foundation of sustainable recovery and leading back to development. You mentioned about also security sector, etc. It has to be people-centered justice and security as drivers of stability. And then thirdly, it's very important that we have to have a long-term partnership. On the first point, in fragile and conflict-affected settings, security, justice, governance institutions matter very much. In many crises, we see visible destructions, building being bombed. I have seen that those, especially in Ukraine, but in Lebanon, in Gaza, everywhere, those visible destruction, damaged homes, schools are also hit, hospitals, roads, infrastructure, they're all damaged. We see it visual, it's a visible destruction, but there's also invisible damage that often determines whether recovery succeeds or fails. Erosion of trust in public institutions when women no longer reports violence because women expect that there's no response. And we have seen that everywhere in crisis settings. Weakening of rule of law systems that prevent private sector investments, loss of confidence in security services when young people, women, communities, and of course also men, they cannot safely engage in livelihoods and small businesses where if there's no confidence in security services. Accumulation of grievances that can fuel future instability when land and resource disputes go unresolved. So recovery requires rebuilding trust, restoring institutions, and also give people confidence in the current and also in the future, and there's a sense of hope. The second point is people-centered security and justice as drivers of stability. Justice institutions and systems must meet and address people's everyday legal needs. They must be accessible, fair, and transparent. Security, justice, governance institutions create the foundation for recovery to last. This is why we, UNDP, is investing or has been investing in institutions from day one or day one of crisis. We don't wait until crises are over. And DRC, for example, we support the digital justice systems that improves transparency, case management, and detainee tracking. In Somalia, we support judiciary, police, and local governance institutions, mobile courts. This is not only in Somalia, but these mobile courts are very, very, very helpful to bring justice closer to remote and conflict-affected communities. In Mali, we support justice services, community security, and local dialogues. In Central African republics, as well as the DRC, we worked, of course, together with many partners, donor partners. We support the transitional justice processes, and transitional justice is critical. It takes a long time to set up the system. We all know that, but this really builds the confidence of the whole population. We have seen in many countries where, by the time that system has been set up, the funding goes less. But let's just make sure that we remain committed from our side, yes, but also all partners, to support the transitional justice. And in case, the example can go on, and this is why, as I said, the partnership is very important. The shared commitment is very, very important, and we should see our support not as fragmented by sector. but more integrated system overview is extremely important. The World Bank, for example, the international financial institutions and regional development banks, you all bring financing, and now it's jobs agenda, private sector expertise, UN and including UNDP. We bring institution building, peace building, recovery expertise, and then also global presence. And that also means the trust and also knowing, I think in the morning session, our administrator also mentioned that the political capitals, I myself spending almost 25 years on the ground, that yes, we do have that political capitals because of the presence of the past 6 decades and so on. And these all we have to put together to support the national leadership. We sometimes use the word ownership, but it's more than ownership. In the end, what makes difference is that national leadership, as we heard now from the minister, and we really have to come together and then see how we can put our resources, our comparative advantage, so that countries can continue to function, or government continues to function, and the people are off from that crisis mode to the recovery. And I think this is how peace can come more durable. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to Anne now, and drawing from your stabilization and transition experiences from contexts including the Sahel, West Africa, Iraq, or Afghanistan, what lessons do you think we've learned about the relationship between stabilization, governance, and recovery? And how do you think civilian political security dimensions should be sequenced to avoid reinforcing fragility?
Well, thank you very much. And thank you for the opportunity to participate in this forum with the World Bank and in the context of the issuance of the new FCV strategy. The first point I'd like to make is that we are certainly facing a fragility environment that has become much more diverse. And we've heard a lot about that in the last day and a half, but it means that we cannot think about states that are experiencing fragility in discrete categories. We can, but it doesn't the taxonomy doesn't necessarily apply to the reality. We've certainly heard about that here today. Conflict affected, post-conflict, at risk. This idea of sequencing really doesn't apply today, and it hasn't applied for a long time, where we're seeing more protracted and higher levels of violence, cycles of violence, climate stress and shocks. On top of that, driving displacement, food insecurity, transnational threats, terrorist organizations that can permeate borders, and then health shocks like Ebola. And we certainly heard about that a little bit this morning as well. And these factors are intersecting with potentially sometimes existing factors on the ground, like governance failure or weaknesses that are already present. And I would also like to add in this context that fragility is really not necessarily, or often not, uniform within the borders of a country. And we've certainly heard about that today as well, and therefore requires very tailored responses. So a capital city can be functioning, ministries can be operating, while local communities at a distance from the capital are living in poverty and under the threat of localized violence and the threat of climate change. And we heard President Chapo talk about that yesterday with respect to the situation in Mozambique in Cabo Delgado. So the corollary to that is that in many cases, we don't view reconstruction and recovery as necessarily as it can be countrywide. It might not be, and it may not be a linear effort following full-scale hostilities. We are seeing these cycles of violence and recovery that add to the complexity of the situation. So what have we learned from our past experience? I'm just going to cite the example of Afghanistan in the US case because it is so stark. We were there for 2 decades. We spent $145 billion in reconstruction and then a collapse within days of withdrawal. We are in receipt of a number of reviews about our presence there. And I'll just cite the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan's assessment. The reconstruction effort amounted to 21-year efforts rather than one 20-year effort. Timelines were driven by political calendars, not conditions on the ground. Aid bypassed state institutions, building parallel structures that generated neither capacity nor legitimacy. Power stayed centralized, never reaching the communities that needed to trust the state in order to sustain it. And monitoring measured money spent rather than impact delivered, making failure consistently invisible until it was irreversible. We can all argue with the starkness of these conclusions, where there might have been some progress, and certainly in the context of the many important international efforts there. But I just wanted to mention that this is really a touchstone now for our lessons and for our engagement in fragile states context. So in that respect, these lessons shaped something I had the opportunity to lead on in my last role, called the Global Fragility Act. And that was an opportunity to institutionalize a very different approach that set a priority on prevention and resilience, which we've also talked today. And resilience is very relevant in the context of recovery and reconstruction, of course, in fragile and conflict affected states. We were required to make plans. We were required to coordinate among ourselves and with our international partners to create conflict-sensitive programming, emphasize locally driven solutions, accountable partnerships with national governments, and the engagement of civil society, as well as implementing a rigorous monitoring and evaluation system. And that approach has been implemented in a number of different places. Some of those places it is ongoing. And in particular, because we've heard from our Coastal West Africa colleagues earlier in the conference, I did want to mention our work there, where we are dealing with countries that are in very vulnerable areas bordering the Sahel. And our work there focused very much on how to build trust between communities and government authorities and security forces. What we saw in some of these places where we were working is that while in a typical, maybe a past response, the go-to would have been simply security, drones, visibility, more border patrol. But what we were working on in the context of this initiative, and what we've been talking about here today as well, is the vital importance of dealing with maybe what you'd call development, maybe what you'd call resilience, of building community resilience, enhancing social cohesion, working on inclusive economic development as well, to make those communities less vulnerable to the threats from the porous borders where they were situated. Now, one just last point to respond to you, Claire, about the relationship between political efforts, governance, rule of law, economic development, and security. It's an ecosystem. Again, I just want to say how important it is that we no longer, we cannot see these efforts as necessarily sequenced, but they are interrelated. Security without governance produces unaccountable forces. We need accountable security forces in these stabilization situations. Governance without security cannot extend its authority effectively. Security must be grounded in the rule of law and justice, and we just heard about the work of UNDP on that. And it needs political will to enforce the rule of law. Political settlements obviously must create the foundation for security arrangements to hold, and governance has to function so economic recovery investment can take root, but these tracks must be developed in parallel, not in a series. And if you look to at least the US definition of stabilization, it is rooted in a political concept. We define it as a political endeavor involving an integrated civilian military process to create conditions where locally legitimate authorities and systems can peaceably manage conflict and prevent a resurgence of violence. And I think that that's a definition that should be informing our work more broadly. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Now I'll turn to Bettina Gamazi. The World Bank was originally established as the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, yet recovery today is unfolding in a much more complex environment. from a regional and from an institutional perspective, how would you say the World Bank is adapting its approach to recovery and reconstruction in FCV to support countries facing simultaneous crises?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Claire. And thanks to everybody for being here. Lots of lessons learned from the panelists today. So thank you for your contributions as well. Yeah, your question is spot on. It's in our mission. It's in our title. We celebrated our 80th anniversary not long ago, and reconstruction is still front and center. I would even say that is even more crucial now than before, as it's linked to our mission of eradicating extreme poverty. You would know today that 50% of the extreme poor live in FCV context. So it is mission critical for us. I think we cannot move the needle on development without a laser focus approach on FCV. And as you said, it's happening against a very complex environment. The minister spoke earlier about the poly crisis, a crisis within broader crisis. We heard about, this is happening against also what's, whether it's climate change, it's migration. So we cannot look at it as one priority without looking at the whole issues around the multiple crises that countries are living through. And and the whole reconstruction discussion also, it's happening in a context where fiscal space is becoming more and more limited, appetite of donors becoming, widespread. There is so much to do and so many priorities. So it is a very complex environment of how we think about reconstruction. You asked about the institutional and regional approach. So on the institutional level, the FCV refresh, I think, very important, and it's really asking us to look at 4 major shifts that are very important. One is it cannot be only about reacting to issues. So how do we anticipate better, and how do we help countries also be proactive? So that's an important element in how we think about FCV. The other one is the differentiated approach. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. And what we heard today from the multiple examples that were shared with us is, countries are at different phases in the FCV chain, if you want. So we need a differentiated approach depending on where they are and where they need. The other shift that is very important is jobs and private sector. Jobs very important in the context of FCV because, once people have more opportunity, that helps them, get out of the fragility as much as possible. And then the other shift that is very important, and all of the panelists spoke about it already, is the importance of partnership. And partnerships in multiple dimensions. Is a partnership with the government themselves. So we're in it as a trusted partner, but they really own it. And we heard very good examples here. It's partnership with the partners, with the donors, understanding that each partner has a comparative advantage to bring to the table, and avoiding duplication is very important. It's partnership with the private sector. We cannot really do it without the private sector. Government resources are very limited. And then partnership with civil society, their voice is very important. So these are the 4 important shifts in the FCV refresh that are important. You asked about the regional dimension. So MENAP is a region that has a very, very strong content of FCV. We have many countries that are going through, in fragility category, and each one of them is very different. So just to share a few of our interventions in these countries, Syria, we re-engaged this year. It's a very, very important re-engagement. The approach is basically how do we build, essential services, and how do we work with the government on a longer-term approach for resilience. We're working with many people in Syria, of course, and it's a good story that, we need to learn from the examples. We need to avoid the situation of, not thinking about long-term approach. So that's really our thinking in Syria. Lebanon, the minister spoke about it, our collaboration in multiple sectors. Of course, this is a country that unfortunately, living through multiple crises at the same time. So how do we make sure that there is the support needed? Again, as the minister mentioned, within the process of a longer term approach, and we're working with partners as well there. Yemen is a very nice also engagement. We went to our board not long ago with our new CPF for Yemen. The approach has been to make sure that we preserve the human capital as much as possible. So a lot of our intervention has been on education and health. But also how do we build longer term sustainability? Afghanistan, it's all about the pivots. How do we pivot our support through the private sector? And it has a very strong jobs dimension to it. So the lessons for us is it's very important to remain engaged. And it's very important to think about the foundation of resilience. We do a lot of our work on trying to understand how much it would cost to recover. So this is the damage needs assessment that we do. And we work on this with many partners. We don't do it alone. We get out to a number at the end that only shows us, the needs assessment in terms of reconstruction that is physical, not the full picture, but that's, a good entry point for us. The numbers needed as part of the damage needs assessment are in billions of dollars. So when we did the one for Syria, 200 billion, when we did for Lebanon about 11, that needs to be reviewed now, given the additional problems that the country is going through. But the numbers are big in any case, but what they need a bigger understanding with the rest of the community working on development, that how do we work together to support the countries, and then how do we bring in the private sector. The FCV refresh strategy is a World Bank Group strategy, so it also brings the importance and the role of the private sector at the heart of the equation on how we think about recovery and reconstruction.
Thank you. We're going to go to a second round of questions now, and then we'll go to online in the room for any questions. And I'll just mention to those of you online, please feel free to start putting your questions in the chat. So for the second round, I'd like us to turn to looking ahead and to think about the longer term. So starting with you, Minister, looking ahead in Lebanon, what are Lebanon's priorities for rebuilding resilience and social stability? And I know you've already talked about the importance of social safety nets, but can you tell us more about how you approach social safety nets and building human capital, support to returnees, and the importance of inclusive access to services?
Thank you, Claire. Before I talk about social safety nets, actually, I want to highlight another big source of fragility in Lebanon. Not just from this war, this is historical, which is the very fragile condition or relationship between the state and the citizens. We've historically, that has been weak. It has been damaged over years of not just conflict, but particularities to the Lebanese condition, the confessional system, which people resort to as a form of security. What has happened is that maybe as a result of it or as a cause of it, the emergence of a strong civil society and NGO sector and private sector. And that's all good. And in fact, that is a big source of resilience for Lebanon when the state is not able to provide the civil society and the NGO sector and private sector comes in. I mean, education is a classic one. And that's all good, and that's very critical. At the same time, it has meant a very weak relationship with the state. And this is important for moving forward, to rebuild that confidence in the state. And I'm not saying government, I'm saying in the state, in its institutions, in its ability to be there for especially the vulnerable parts of the population. And it's a big theme, if you will, an objective of all of us as ministers. So on the military side, of course, and security side, this is part of the whole decisions that we've taken as a government and the president of no arms outside of the state's control. So reestablishing the state's sovereignty over its security. But then similarly, on the social side, where for many years the government has not been providing for the poor and vulnerable, which now we are trying to increase through increased spending on social protection, social safety net. When I came in, there was $5 million in my budget to spend on cash transfers. The first thing I did is I went to the Minister of Finance and I said, look, we have poverty is north of 30%. And this even before this recent war, but knowing how fragile the situation is. And so I said, look, we have to be able to allocate much more from our domestic resources on social protection. And that happened. The minister approved it in the cabinet and parliament. I had a 40% increase in my budget on social protection. And why social protection? One of the main levers to build that condition or that trust between state and the citizen is because it's a direct transfer. It's a direct connection. You know, when I provide assistance, a monthly cash transfer to people, they get the message on their phone. They know it's from the government. And it starts to build this confidence that the state is there for those that need it. So that's very important. So we invested heavily in our social protection systems financially. As I mentioned, increased budget, but also our partners. The World Bank has come in with 200 million loan. The EU has given 45 million grants. And interestingly, on the EU grant, it's come directly to the government, to the budget, which the EU and Lebanon has never done because they didn't have confidence in the state. But this is the first time that they started to do that. And that is a great sign of confidence, bringing back the institutions and people's trust in them. And then having very open and transparent communication, as I briefly mentioned before. But for example, call centers, grievance redress mechanisms, going really big on them. I doubled the number of operators that we have working, taking calls from people that have complaints and, you know, legitimate grievances or not legitimate. But this is very important to really, you know, strengthen those systems in good times and in bad times. And then, of course, building the human capital. We cannot say enough about that. Lebanon, this is its main assets historically, are people who are very, nevertheless, educated, very entrepreneurial, and we must preserve that. We're losing our youth. Migration has become really sort of a critical point. Unfortunately, most surveys show that most youth, the minute they ask them, when you finish university, what do you want to do? They all say, I want to leave. But on the good note is that when you ask them if there is stability and security, will you come back? And almost unanimously, they will come back. So this is what we want to do, rebuild that trust between the state and the citizen, provide the basic security and stability, and then I think the rest will happen almost by itself.
Thank you, Minister. I'll go next to Anne. And Anne, many recovery efforts struggle to move from the short-term stabilization to the sustainable long-term peace building and institutional resilience. Based on your experience, what are the key ingredients for making recovery more sustainable, durable, and inclusive over time?
Well, thank you for that question. And coming after the minister, I'm very humbled by the opportunity to speak to it. I have essentially seven points. And as I made this list, I recognized that I could have made a completely different list. There are so many aspects and so many context-specific elements to stabilization and to transitions. But let me just mention these. We've talked already about the political foundation of political settlement that holds Stabilization is inherently a political activity. These are not optional preconditions to progress. They're the foundation on which everything else depends. So as good as our work on the technical side it may be, we need this political foundation. And the second is an institutional investment that works with and through national systems. That's true on the security side, and it's true throughout government. That's the lesson I think we've learned the hard way, and most repeatedly, that durable recovery requires building through national systems, even when they're not perfect, even in situations where countries are also experiencing crisis, and that is it demands patience and tolerance for risk, maybe more than some would like to or historically have been willing to accept. And as we've been discussing here today, one component of that is building institutions that have the capacity to mobilize the private sector and also to work with the private sector, because we're seeing new ways in which private sector platforms are working directly to facilitate transitions. The third is local ownership. That means partnership not only at the state level, but with local communities. That includes co-creation. And that engages that reaches not only the capital but peripheries of countries, men and women, formal institutions, customary authorities, communities, and building conditions for resilience in the event of the next crisis. We've talked quite a bit about young people. They have to be a focus. And while these community level processes we found are slower and sometimes more difficult over time, they create a more durable and resilient outcome. The fourth is adaptive management, grounded in discipline assessment, because recovery is fragile environments is not linear. Conditions can definitely change faster than program and design and implementation and budgeting can anticipate. I think we've all experienced that disconnect, those of us who have worked in this field. So a regular, honest assessment of what's working, what's not, and the institutional authority to adapt accordingly I think is a very important ingredient with monitoring that measures impact and not just activity. This is a point that is not new, but I think we're still working as a community in this field to implement this set of principles. I want to underscore here a point that I've heard at this forum, and I think is also terribly important in this effort, and that is that good data is key. And I think we can look forward to artificial intelligence as an enabler for us with proper application. I think this is going to change much of the way that we work. We know not yet how. And I think for us as practitioners, we owe it to ourselves to understand that aspect of our work more effectively so that we can engage with data experts and AI, those who are AI knowledgeable, to make AI an enabler for our work as well. The fifth is accountable and transparent institutions. Transparency enables accountability. We heard the Ukrainian minister talk about that. When communities see how their resources are allocated, how decisions are made, how officials are performing, they have the information they need to make demands on the institutions that serve them. Building accountability is not just, of course, a technical matter. It requires protected and supported civil society, free media, community access to information, and international actors willing to report on failures and hold themselves and others accountable. The sixth is coordination and partnerships. We have heard quite a lot about that here already. I like to say that scarcity breeds cooperation and innovation. And I think we are at a moment where we have some opportunities to innovate and to be creative in the face of the changes in the global environment we're in with the reductions in foreign assistance, but also the opportunities to mobilize capital in the private sector. And here I would not only want to highlight the importance to look across disciplines, for example, those who are involved in climate adaptation, where it may be relevant in conflict affected areas, but also the importance of understanding how to speak one another's language. I think we spent a couple of decades across our agencies, our disciplines, our development, our diplomatic, and our military learning one another's language. And I think we may need to double down to work across to the language of the private sector. That is something that we need to learn. And then finally, I wanted to mention the availability of expertise, which is shifting. Those of you, many of you here are well aware of the dramatic shifts inside the US government, where much expertise is no longer in the government. There's expertise in many parts of our sectors. And I think to make the general point, we need this expertise. We needed the expertise in fragility and in conflict sensitivity within our ministries, within our governments, within the IFIs, and with greater exposure in the private sector as well. And then finally, I would just flag a point that we can't let go of the fact that our work will require strategic patience and commitment over time. The fragility that's experienced around the globe with so many of the world's poorest has been grown over generations. The drivers of conflict are not going to respond to 1 or 2 year programming cycles, speaking from a US perspective. And I think as an international community, we need to understand the time that's required to make the transformations that are necessary. Yes, we need the quick wins. Yes, we need to respond to humanitarian crises in the most urgent situations, but we also need to do so with the longer term in mind.
Thank you, Anne. And before we go to the room, I'd like to turn to Shoko. How is UNDP calibrating its approach to recovery and reconstruction? And what new models of partnership, of financing, of local engagement do you think will be important in the future?
Thank you very much. You mentioned new models. I think this is the evolving models. And instead of responding to what's happening, we should be ahead. When we all look at the nature of crisis, yes, it's changing fast. We have the largest crisis and also humanitarian caseloads. While the envelope or the available resources are declining clearly. The nature of crisis, this is crises are no longer temporary disruption. It is much deeper and repeated and protracted. So development work should not wait until the stability comes. Our administrator said this morning that the fragility is at every country's doorstep, and I think I found it was well said. So we have to reverse the thinking and say that development actually builds stability. And third, I think we have also heard about the trust and confidence. Yes, that it's, if I can use the word, that it's not only deteriorating, but it's collapsing. Trust in institutions, trust in cooperation and multilateralism. And without trust, the recovery has no foundation. So building trust is extremely important. I was very happy and impressed to hear that in Lebanon, very conscious efforts are made. So with this, we are evolving. Our model is evolving and try to be ahead, but I think sometimes we are still catching up. But the first point I want to say is that, early recovery, early investment in recovery is a must. Second, we also need to move from the very traditional aid mentality and aid architecture to the investment, how we connect also with private sector and economic growth while the crisis unfolding sometimes. And then, of course, sorry that we all keep saying, but partnership, that is very important. So from UNDP side, that early recovery is something that we've been talking about. We've been practicing from day one, and linking the survival to stability, relief to recovery. And we are also in this context bringing the climate resilience elements now that we heard on yesterday morning from the president of Mozambique. That climate is really driving, the driver of instability. So whatever we do in recovery or early recovery work, we have to also consider the climate change elements. Yes, and so early recovery is the entry point, and we support the livelihood and reactivating local systems. For example, in Yemen, we have enhanced rural resilience program. We have reached 2.1 million people, and we reduced reliance on humanitarian aid by 48%. In Sudan as well, we reached out to 1 million people with, to support them with livelihood, 5 million with essential services, and then also established 75 community-based conflict resolution mechanisms to rebuild that sense of trust and confidence. The second point is that we have to, as I mentioned, that we have to shift the way we work from aid provision to investment. Sustainable recovery in fragile setting depends on governance. We talked about that, rule of law, and institutional capacity. These are foundation to de-risk investment and enable private capital and jobs. Across Syria and Ukraine, UNDP is de-risking private sector engagement, expanding MSME support, enabling job creation. In Gaza, we just created the investment mapping. Our recovery strategy targets up to 20,000 MSMEs and 100,000 jobs. And that is supported by, as I mentioned, the emergency investor mapping exercise, identifying 11 investment opportunities. In Afghanistan, we also supported 90,000 MSMEs, majority women-led. In partnership with IFIs, we help unlock financing while preserving local institutions and development gains in crisis settings. So this includes policy de-risking, enabling environment for markets, and sustaining investment impact. In Yemen as well, long-term work with the World Bank has strengthened the institutions, restored the livelihood. In Ukraine, UNDP is supporting government to unlock over 1.4 billion from European Investment Bank across 500 recovery projects in 150 municipalities. Finally, and as I said, once again, that we need to scale in partnership. Yes, we need to work more closely, the governments, IFIs, the UN, civil society, academia. And when I say also governments at national level as well as local level. Joint assessment that I think was mentioned also before is entry point. World Bank, EU, and UN are conducting shared assessments in, for example, Gaza, Ukraine, and Haiti to align priorities and investments. So this upstream process help mobilizing financing for infrastructure, institutions, and human capital, and that are being anchored nationally led in nationally led recovery and resilience plan. And as I said before, linking and bringing private sector as soon as possible. It's a joint investment in institutions, jobs, local capacity that allows financing to flow and the stability to take hold. From UNDP side, as part of the endeavors, we are also developing UNDP version of FCV strategy. I hope we'll be able to share that with you. It's not as expanded as FCV strategy, but we are really looking from our side how we can be faster, how we can engage the private sector much quicker, and then do the crisis work differently from the previous years, previous decades. So we look forward to discussing that with you and make sure that in the end we have an integrated support to national governments and the people on the ground who are affected. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And then, Butena, looking ahead, what does a more sustainable and inclusive recovery model look like from the World Bank's perspective?
Thank you very much. So I'll focus on three things because a lot has been mentioned already. So one is really thinking very deliberately about human capital. Because reversing human capital losses is a long-term agenda and it takes a lot. So as we think about recovery, human capital should not be an afterthought. That's one element. The second one, and it was mentioned, the importance of institutions, and it's really linked to rebuilding the social contract. When people living in FCV context see that the governments are there, they're doing a lot of work. How do we get to a position where they feel comfortable that there is something that's going to happen and their voice is captured there? And I think here it's how do we work on building the institutional capacity? How do we make sure that the role of the partners is to help, but with the objective is try to get out as soon as possible. And that's possible when the institutional conditions are right. So think about it as support, but hopefully as a short term as possible when the situation are ripe for that. And the last point that we keep talking about a lot is the private sector, and I think it's very important. We need to think about it, in a bigger approach, because the private sector exists a lot, but it's small, local, and in most of the cases, there is a lot of good activities. But can we take it to the next level? That requires a lot of work, of course, on de-risking, on creating the enabling conditions for the private sector to work. There was one element that I haven't heard in the discussion, and I'm keen to bring it, is the role of the diaspora. And we've seen it. We've seen it in almost every FCV context we work in. The first people to come when the situation is right are diaspora, and they're willing to do it. They roll out their sleeves. Most of the cases, I met so many of them over the years. They leave their kids, their family in another country, and they move there to rebuild their country, which is great. It's happening without a strong institutional framework around it. So maybe one thing we need to collectively think about, how do we support the diaspora to play their role? There is a lot of thinking about diaspora bonds, for example. I think it may help us, because at the end of the day, people from a particular country are very keen in the success. They're very keen for their countries to get out of the list of the FCV. They're very keen for their kids to have a better future. They're very keen to support. How do we create the condition for the success? I think it's very important.
Thank you. We're now going to go to online and then the room for a few questions before we close the session. Can I ask, do we have some questions from online?
So we're following the meeting chat and the questions that came through the application. Our speakers responded to most of them, but there is one follow-up on the transparency and governance issues. And Her Excellency Lebanese Minister talked about re-establishing trust with the communities, with the public. The follow-up question is about how to re-establish trust, improve transparency and governance in the international arena with global institutions and financiers. Another follow-up is we talked about recovery and reconstruction and how it should be sustainable, but how we can use recovery and reconstruction as a means to improve stability and peace building. Thank you.
On the first question, to build trust with the international community. So I gave the example of the latest support from the EU, the 45 million euro grant straight into the budget, like a budget support, which had not happened before. And I think what's this represents is this turnaround international community, despite everything, but in more confidence in Lebanon's ability, in our systems, in our transparency, in our programs, and essentially in the approach that the government has been using. So I think the more we do this kind of build our systems and strengthen them and open them up and use data and all of the things that were mentioned here, this will bring that kind of confidence into from the international community. And I think we've Lebanon has had a long relationship with, for example, World Bank, but also other IFIs, and by their own testament, things have changed quite a bit in terms of how they, the kind of involvement, the engagement. So doing more of what we're doing, but just much more at a bigger scale is, I think, is going to be the road to go. What was the second question?
How can reconstruction also advance stability and peace building?
Yeah, I think very important, and this is what we want to follow in our process of reconstruction and recovery, is involving the local communities and the local leaders, the municipalities, of course, because they know the situation on the ground. And even now, in the humanitarian response, we are following a very decentralized approach, begins from actually the shelter level up to a municipal level, governorate level, and then the central. So having involvement of all stakeholders along the way from beginning to end, that's very important to kind of get this. And we will adopt the same kind of approach in the recovery and reconstruction. So involving communities, involving local leaders, I think is very important to sort of have a strengthened recovery and reconstruction plan beyond everything else that needs to be done, all the technical work. But the soft elements are what's really important.
Did you want to add, Anne?
I just wanted to put a fine point on what you just said, that peace building is inherently part of reconstruction and recovery. It is for us, as we think about it, it is one and the same. It must be integrated. And I think the minister has just described a real world example of how that is happening.
Thank you. We'll now take questions from the room. One second, you'll need a microphone.
I guess not. Thank you. My name is Mais. I'm with Syrian American Medical Society Foundation. Shoku, you mentioned linking and bringing in the private sector as soon as possible, and great to hear you're working on a strategy that is operational to make it faster. And thank you, Buthina, also you mentioned that it's a big subject and we're talking a lot about it. Honestly, from NGO community point, we're struggling to know how that would look like in practice. So if the is it the local private sector, as you mentioned, or is it bigger? How practical linking to private sector and inclusion would look like? If we can just hear some examples. Are we thinking about having maybe a forum dialogue conference with the private sector, civil society, UN and World Bank as well? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take 2 or 3 questions.
Yes, hi, Francesca Recanatini. From the World Bank, working on governance is a privilege to actually listen to all your voice, and it's a pity that the minister from Ukraine had to log off. I wanted to build some of the last comment that the minister and all of you have emphasized and push on two topics, also thanks to the colleague that raised this issue. I'm someone that work on the front line. And so when we think, I heard over and over how we focus on reconstruction and how it's important that we reconstruct and we bring in the private sector and we keep an institution. Two worries that every day when I engage in some of this country in the Middle East and in Latin America where I work now, continue to come to me. If we rebuild the past, we are actually rebuilding the distortion in the system that most likely have led to the conflict or facilitated the conflict. And mentioned this in their remarks about Afghanistan, as we knew. So the opportunity that we have even to bring the private sector has to come by facilitating, not rebuilding the past, but actually building a different set of opportunity and economic opportunity that are inclusive for everybody. And I think I would like you to reflect concretely because this is what we struggle. And the second point is about the capacity. We as frontline practitioner, we always engage with very dedicated counterpart from the donor community and the government, but the capacity is limited. We have no tool to understand the capacity lost within the public administration and the government. I am not aware of any tool that estimate that. We've been trying over and over, not the physical infrastructure, the capacity that has been lost. And yet we rely on the champion, like the minister, to help us to implement this amazing project that we have. And this is, I think, that undermine our ability to have an impact. Thank you.
Take one more and then I'll come to the panel.
Hi, my name is Hafsa and I work with the World Bank on gender in the MENA region. I wanted to ask that I know that partners are working on delivering essential services in FCV context using digital tools. For example, Shoko mentioned the e-justice platform. There's also e-wallets and social protection programs. So my question is, as more services move online in FCV contexts, how are you looking at online risks that women are exposed to? We're seeing a lot of technology facilitated GBV in the MENA region, and I just want to know how you are thinking about that. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll go to the panel. Who would like to respond? We'll start with you, Bettina.
Thank you. Great questions. Thank you so much. I'll start with the last one. I think, yeah, I mean, digital in FCV context is a very important tool for us. But of course, in every other context, like any other context, there are risks linked to digital that we need to think about, whether it's, cybersecurity, data protection, false information, but that's also part of an overall approach. So in the bank, we have our digital strategy where the risks dimension are very important. So we apply them throughout. They're very, very important to be applied in the context of FCV. So the point here is, as we think about anything, whether it's private sector, digital, gender, it's not, it's within the broader ecosystem of how we think about these topics. There is nothing that is, there is so many things unique about FCV, but also, there are very important things that are unique at each topic, and all of them together is very important. So, there is no silver bullet to the issues. With every instrument, we need to look at the risks of that instrument, and as they apply to the FCV context, I think that's the point that I wanted to mention. On the private sector, I think it's both. It's the local private sector that needs to be nurtured and supported, but also making sure that there is a private sector that is, has a deeper pockets, if you will, and, have a bigger appetite to risks. I think as part of the differentiated approach, we also need to think about it from private sector perspective. And for every country, of course, we have the FCV strategy refresh as an umbrella, but every country has its CPF. And within that CPF, there is a lot of conversation on the role of the private sector. So you mentioned, Syria, we're, in the process of preparing a CPF. There will be a lot of discussion with the private sector and with the CSO. That's part also of how we think about strategies. So maybe not in abstract, although I know as part of the refresh strategies, there was a lot of conversation, but we take it also deeper as in a country by country perspective. And of course, that's an invitation to have this conversation on these particular topics.
If I may come on the absorption capacity that you mentioned, or capacity itself, and then whether there's tool and so on. From my own experiences, also, to working in different countries, that capacity and then the whole context, it's so different from one country to another. Bigger countries, smaller countries. The capacity was, some countries had very good capacity. Some other countries do not have any capacity, and there's a diaspora elements and so on. So one specific tool would not really be enough to assess the capacity and then follow up kind of support program. But I think what the UN, including UNDP, can offer in that context is that we've been on the ground for 60 years, 70 years. We have a lot of national colleagues, because in the end, for me, any development or recovery work, actually the national colleagues roles are so important to deeply understand the country context. Also have that political acumen and political capitals, knowledge, long-term network with different actors, oppositions, governments, local CSOs, and sometimes rebels, and then others. That network is all contribute to assess the needs for capacity building. And I think that capacity itself, I think, is the key to ensure that there is national leadership, national ownership, and like the case of Lebanon that we hear that. So yes, capacity, and I think this is where I think more support needs to go. Online risks, yes, we are mindful, so that's why I said that we're not doing what we have been doing. UNDP has a specific program funded by the Korean police, because they have a lot of knowledge about how to say policing or preventing the kind of digital harassment. So we're working very closely with them on in specific countries. How are we? I mean, private sector. It's been already mentioned. But I think we started to also overuse the word private sector, and we need to unpack it more. Private sector, but at the local level, where the small but important jobs are created. That's how those displaced people or returnees would start their lives. But that there's a bigger private sector drive, and that's where I think the national economy will be driven, and then also the investment within the country, but from abroad. And so how do we engage those bigger partners? So what I take from your question also is that we need to unpack that private sector terminology and make sure that among ourselves also we know what we mean by private sector. Yes.
Thank you. Anne and then the minister.
Yeah, just two quick points. One is what I think I heard in one of the questions is that there's a cost to coordination. It takes time. And there is a cost to coordination. I don't have a straight answer for that, but I do think that it remains terribly important. It's especially difficult in organizations where there is less capacity. I think we just have to acknowledge that and then go on to acknowledge it's important. I thought your point about exacerbating existing inequalities and the rebuilding is really, really vital. It is maybe the peace building component, one could say, of the recovery, and could bring me to a point that I want to emphasize here, that in the recovery, we also, your objectives are resilience to a future cycle of violence or conflict, and I think that's where we want to go. So I appreciate you raising the point and focusing on the prevention aspect.
Just very briefly, for sure, it's about building back better, to use another overused phrase, and it has its different dimensions, and this is exactly what we want to do, and build the kind of capacity that's needed to do this. And all too often we see, instead of capacity building, capacity replacement. And this is what we have to be careful of. But I think absolutely the building back better reconstruction process, peace building, I think is the way to go. And Lebanon at least is going to need the support and assistance of all the institutions around here. Thank you.
Well, it's my job to close our session. I want to say a huge thank you to our panelists and participants. And I think it's clear to all of us that this is really the moment to rethink recovery and reconstruction on the heels of the World Bank's new strategy, in anticipation of UNDPs, but with knowledge as an asset, and the lessons, as we've heard, are there. And there are lessons coming from current situations as well. So how is this community really going to challenge itself to rethink the recovery and reconstruction of the future? We covered a lot of ground, and I'm just going to highlight a few of those points in closing. One, the central importance of reading context and the